And in this particular incarnation of my life, I own Rhythms Fitness Studio. But most of my life was spent in economic development, and that was a combination of education and business development and larger picture economic development through um, the community college system, and prior to that, a bunch of fun incarnations all over the planet. Started out doing Head Start programs in Oakland, California, my hometown, and realized at that point that the world was not equal. And from there, kind of took off and traveled the planet and ended up again in the Peace Corps in Central America, and quickly started living within communities that deal with the same issues that we saw in Half the Sky. My third day in the Peace Corps, I watched a woman break her children's hands so that they would be more efficient in their baking. And that kind of thing. And of course, most people who go into the Peace Corps go home. About a half will leave within the first month of being in their host country, and then the others will generally leave within about a year or so. And the devoted, the passionate resolve, the mad ones stay, and some never even go home. Some stay forever and become part of the larger international aid organizations like USAID and other programs that are out there. From there, though, got involved in economic development in the United States because, of course, there are places in the United States, like, let's call downtown Oakland is a great example of a place that doesn't have the same privileges many places have. And then, of course, one of the places that we don't remember about a whole lot is rural America, which is certainly not what, and 25 years ago, Nevada County was even part of that, of course. And at some point, I ran a program, a business development program for Placer, Nevada, Sierra, Plumas, Lassen, and Modoc counties. And those counties at that point were actually written into state law as what was called the empty corner of California. Limited resources were ever even thought of for that area. It was a miracle that there were even community colleges out in that area, and still are, thank goodness. But a great deal of attention was then placed on the possibility of building your own business, because by that time, one of the very successful programs that exists on this planet when it comes to building one's own little business and thus one's own income and thus the opportunity for education for one's children come from the Grameen Bank program that started by this wonderful man who didn't win the Nobel Prize for economics but won it for peace because of the depth and breadth of what Grameen has done. And we'll talk a little bit about what super micro enterprise is about. This particular program is about giving generally women, because they tend to pay back better than men do, infinitesimally small loans, starting generally at a few dollars and kind of going up from there, and never very high. Traditional banking does not really do a lot with economic development unless it's forced to, for the most part. That people get loans because they actually have so much money that they have enough equity in something that they can afford to give it all back immediately. But these kinds of risky little tiny loans were started in Bangladesh and have been replicated in a variety of different programs around the world now. You've heard a little bit in Half the Sky about the benefit of giving a tiny little bit of money to get your first chicken, a couple of chickens, and away you go. Your first raffia for making baskets, your first down payment on a sewing machine, that kind of thing. He's done amazing work, and we made a case at that point that the same counties that I want us to go and work in today were very, very close to actually being third world counties, and it's particularly true in Plumas, Lassen, and Modoc counties, Sierra as well. And there was a new program that had come out, and I want to tell you the story of the people that started this program. It's a program called Trickle Up. And Glenn and Mildred Leet worked together in the United Nations, and were both widowed and at some point met each other, and were complaining as they were dealing with economic development programs out of the United Nations that nothing ever trickled down to the people who actually needed the money. That there was a massive amount of money being spent by governments all over the world. All the first world countries are obligated to actually to spend a percentage of their gross national product on international aid. And even within faith-based programs and heartfelt programs like we saw again in our movies, it's remarkable how sometimes the money doesn't, or the whatever they're doing doesn't get all the way to the people who actually need it. And so they decided they would create a program called Trickle Up. And they took 100 of their own dollars and began a little program first in the Dominican Republic.
and then started spreading out to different countries, working side by side with this man. As a matter of fact, it started the same kind of principle, but they added to it a little bit. And what they did was they found organizations within the host country who would train people on small business practices, basic little trainings on what it is to own and operate a little business, have them write a super, super simple business outline. In those days they were called business plans, but I don't want you to think of a big, huge, exotic thing. Nice, simple, straightforward, clear thinking kind of a plan is what they would write down, or verbalize if they weren't able to write, and then they'd get their first loan, and off they would go. Most economic development programs in the first world countries, now think Germany, think Japan, think the United States, have about a 20% success rate, 80% failure rate. And Grameen and Trickle Up and other programs like it, they started out and immediately hit an 80% success rate and 20% failure rate. Now, the argument can be made that part of that has to do with the fact that they had no alternatives. The people who had these little tidbit, this little line of relief being given to them, they had nothing else. That was their lifeline. And so they became passionately resolute in their decision to actually have their little sewing company or whatever it might have been. Whereas here, there are more opportunities and lots of lifelines and support nets and that kind of thing. Whether they work or not, at least they do exist for us. And so that 80% success rate was really quite remarkable. So when Trickle Up decided that my counties were third world enough that they would enter the United States market, they decided that they would give $100 little grants and businesses could be started. So we immediately volunteered to be the entity that would do the educational aspect of this. And this gave me an opportunity to meet Millie Leet. Glenn had already died by then. And I've never quite seen anybody like her in my life. Actually, I have, but that was the Dalai Lama. And it's the same kind of glorious clarity, that sense of meeting a person who absolutely was doing what the universe wanted her to do. She was radiant. You bet she's gone now. But she was literally a radiant human being.
And what was her name again?
Mildred Leet, L-E-E-T. And again, the organization is Trickle Up. And Trickle Up does exist. We'll talk about what's happened to them since her departure. But she was, it was an honor to know her. It was an honor to be in her presence. I'm sure that was true of Glenn as well. Just, again, radiant people who knew that they were doing God's work, the work of the universe, however you want to define that. But that beautiful, beautiful thing about them. And again, they were so delighted that they had come upon a partnership and a set of concepts that actually started to have some kind of positive effect in the world. With her departure, Trickle Up changed. And I want to talk about organizational change and how often human beings, as our organizations grow, to kind of to speak a little gym language here, we may start out like this, but as we grow, our hands get a little bit tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and we get a little bit attached to what we're doing and start to hold on and want it to be a particular way. And Trickle Up is not what it once was. It goes to fewer countries. It's not doing anything in the United States. It has the Rockefellers are on the board of directors, and it's an entity now that spends a great deal of time and effort finding its money. At that point, in the early days, it was so inspiring. It found that kind of early, delighted rush of excitement that people would feel about it, and they had more money coming towards them with greater ease. It's not as easy today. It's a harder job, so their response, as is so often the case, is to find powerful, wealthy people who will sit on the board, and it's their obligation to go out and get their friends to bring money into the organization. The organization has more of a top-heavy layer to it than it used to have, and it doesn't do quite as much. So one of the things that Joanna and I have frequently talked about is the caution that we have to take when we're dealing with our own heartfelt desires to do the right and good thing. Because this is a complex world, and since we probably won't be donating money to the United Nations and not our efforts to United States AID, we're going to be going for organizations that are still tangible, that we can touch them, we can see what they're all about, that they are vetted by other organizations. We still would urge every one of us to be cautious about our own passion to do this, that what we need to do is what I call ready, aim, fire, as opposed to ready, fire, aim. Because so often we don't aim enough. That they aren't aiming enough, that there's too much money that is spent in the overhead. We've all seen the situation with the girls' school in the Muslim countries and how his organization fell apart because of mismanagement of funds and that kind of thing. So the need to aim and to really investigate and look at it and find those radiant points of light that are out there that are really doing remarkable things is part of our obligation here. Otherwise, of course, the easy thing to do is to not look and to just give. Because there are, we can go right now to everybody who was in Half the Sky, and we know that they've been vetted and they're nice folks. And we can do that. But the other truth is that we have issues right here. We have the biggest corridor for human trafficking is Interstate 80. And it runs from San Francisco, thus sending people out to Asia, to Reno. And all of the gambling casinos and the Asian mafia that exist within all of that are sending human beings directly out. The second largest, not going to surprise you, Las Vegas to Los Angeles. And that's a local issue. And most of the people who are being taken are Hispanic or are drug abused white girls. But we're looking at a horrible local situation. And I would encourage us to remember to start at home. Then there will be another place that we'll probably want to go. And so many continents are waiting for us. And there's so much to do. And the questions that, again, why I'm urging us to do a little bit of aiming before we fire is that we can be overwhelmed by the amount of sadness that exists in this world. And so we have to find the places that are going to make our hearts sing and do the best we can. And we know you have some very exciting things that you're doing that are going to be fun to hear about. So,
thank you.
some little statements about it all.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Mary.
Mary.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.